The lights were blinding, the music a pulsing, almost angry beat. It wasn't the usual jovial atmosphere on Jimmy Kimmel Live tonight. The air in the studio was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension you could almost taste. The stage lights blazed, reflecting off the polished floor, as the camera panned with a dizzying speed. The announcer's voice boomed. "Please welcome White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt." The audience erupted in a mix of applause and a few scattered boos that seemed to slither from the shadows. Leavitt, all of 27 years old, stepped out with the unshakable confidence of a seasoned warrior. Her blonde hair gleamed, catching the harsh light, and her high heels clicked a rhythmic, almost defiant beat on the floor. She waved, a brief, dismissive gesture, as if the boos were nothing more than a passing breeze. Dressed in a fitted navy business dress, her modern, yet sharp, undeniably Gen Z style embodied a new generation in American politics. Youthful, determined, and utterly unafraid of confrontation. Across the desk, Jimmy Kimmel sat waiting. His signature smile was there, but it felt strained, more forced than usual. His eyes, however, flashed with a sharp, predatory glint, like a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. He adjusted his microphone, tapping it lightly against the desk. A subtle, but telling sign. The audience whispered amongst themselves, sensing the gunpowder in the air. This wasn't going to be a typical, lighthearted chat. This was a battle about to erupt. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The background music faded, and the stage lights shone directly on Jimmy Kimmel. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Karoline Leavitt. "Welcome to the show, Karoline," he began, his tone light, but tinged with a subtle, almost imperceptible jab. 27 years old, the youngest White House press secretary in history. Do you, dance on TikTok, or do you only do that on X? The audience burst into laughter, a few claps echoing from the corners. Leavitt tilted her head, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips, but her eyes remained locked on Kimmel's, unwavering. "I don't dance on TikTok in the White House, Jimmy," she replied, her voice steady, yet sharp, like a finely honed blade. "But if you want, I could teach you a few moves. Might boost your ratings." The crowd laughed again, louder this time, punctuated by a few cheers of support. Kimmel nodded, as if acknowledging the comeback, but a mischievous spark flickered in his eyes. He wasn't about to back down. "So," Kimmel pressed, his tone shifting to a more relaxed conversational vibe, "what about Trump? Working for him must be quite an experience, right? I mean, you represent someone who's not afraid to stir up a little controversy." Leavitt nodded slightly, her confident demeanor unshaken. "I'm proud to work for President Trump," she stated firmly. "He says what others won't dare to, and I'm there to make sure his message is clear." The audience reaction was mixed, a ripple of applause from the back, but also murmurs of doubt, a subtle undercurrent of disagreement. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, tapping lightly on the desk as if carefully weighing his next move. "Oh, clear, huh?" he asked, his voice beginning to drip with sarcasm. "Then you must be pretty busy, right? Clarifying things that aren't always easy on the ears." The atmosphere in the studio shifted again, the audience sensing a turning point, a tightening of the tension. Leavitt sat up straighter, her smile lingering, but her eyes hardening, taking on a steely glint. Kimmel didn't wait for a response. He leaned closer, his voice dropping, becoming more serious. "Let's talk about one of those clarifications. Last month, at a press briefing, you defended Trump's remarks on immigration, remarks many call racist. Are you comfortable standing behind those words?" Silence blanketed the studio. The laughter died, replaced by a few audible gasps from the crowd. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt, her face unwavering, though her fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, a subtle, almost imperceptible sign of intense focus. She took a soft breath, then leaned toward Kimmel, her gaze locking onto his. "Jimmy," she began, her voice even, sharp with a distinct Gen Z edge. Direct, no nonsense. "If you watched that briefing, so, and I'm guessing you only saw the X clip, you'd know what I said. I'm not here to justify things that don't exist. President Trump was talking about border security, not race. But media, like you, love painting it as a different story." The audience remained quiet, a few heads nodding in agreement. But Kimmel didn't back down. He smiled, the grin of someone ready to strike harder. "Oh, I didn't just see a clip," he said, pulling a paper from under the desk, as if he'd been prepared for this very moment. "I've got the full text here. Trump said, quote, 'We need to keep this country clean.' You don't think that clean bit's a little problematic?" Leavitt didn't blink. "You're playing word games, Jimmy," she shot back, calm but cutting. "He was talking about crime, not people. If you're going to quote the whole thing, don't chop it up to fit your script." The audience stirred, scattered claps, a shout of "That's right!" from afar, but also some skeptical headshakes. Kimmel shrugged, as if unfazed, but his eyes lit up. He was clearly enjoying this fight. "Word games or not," he said, his tone turning challenging, "you're his spokesperson. When Trump's called a racist, don't you ever wonder what you're defending?" The question hung in the air, heavy as a punch. Leavitt sat still, her fingers pausing, her eyes fixed on Kimmel. She smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile of appeasement. It was the smile of someone ready to hit back. "I know what you want, Jimmy," she said, her voice low but clear. "You want me to back down. But I'm not here to play your game." The air in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio now thickened, like a storm about to break. Kimmel leaned forward, the paper in his hand trembling slightly as he waved it, like a weapon. "Just getting started, Karoline," he repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm, but his eyes icy sharp. "You say you're not here for my games, but I've got some things I'd like you to explain." He paused, staring straight at Leavitt, then read aloud from the paper. "On February 15th, you posted on X, 'We need a strong America, unviolated by outsiders who destroy.' Many say that's a dog whistle about immigration, and not the positive kind. What do you think?" Leavitt took a short breath, then leaned toward Kimmel, her gaze locking onto his, as if daring him to continue. "Jimmy, you really love digging through my X, don't you?" she said, her voice even, but with a Gen Z sting. "That post was about national security, crime, protecting the border. If you and others want to twist it into a race thing, that's your choice, not the truth." She paused, smiling faintly, but not to soothe. It was the smile of someone holding their ground, unyielding. The audience reacted. Scattered claps, a shout of "That's right!" from afar, but also skeptical headshakes from the front row. Kimmel didn't retreat. He smirked, tossing the paper onto the desk, as if it were no longer needed. "Oh, I'm not twisting anything," he said, his tone sharpening. "I'm just quoting you, but if you want to talk truth, check this out." He gestured to the big screen behind him, and a video played. Leavitt, at a recent briefing, standing at the podium, her voice firm. "We can't let America become a dumping ground for those who don't belong here." The clip stopped, and Kimmel turned to her, eyebrow raised. "Don't belong here? You don't think that's a bit sensitive? I mean, you represent Trump, who's called some countries as-holes. Do you see yourself enabling something?" The studio sank into silence, only the faint breathing of the audience audible. Leavitt glanced at the screen, then back at Kimmel, her eyes unflinching. "You're good at editing, Jimmy," she said, her voice cool but cutting. "That was about smugglers, the ones bringing fentanyl across the border. Stuff that kills thousands yearly. If you want to make it personal, go ahead, but don't pretend you don't know what I meant." She tilted her head, her smirk daring him to push further. The audience stirred, louder now, claps, a yell of "She's right!" but also boos from another corner. Kimmel laughed, the laugh of someone who'd been hit but was still standing. "I'm not pretending," he said, his voice rising, his finger pointing at Leavitt. "You're the press secretary. Your words carry weight. And when you back Trump, whose retweeted stuff even I wouldn't touch on air, don't you think you're defending the indefensible?" He paused, staring her down, as if landing a knockout blow. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt, and this time, she didn't smile. She sat up straight, her hands on the table, her eyes blazing like fire. "Jimmy," she began, her voice low but forceful. "You want to talk retweets? Fine. Let's talk about the times you apologized for your man-show jokes. Stuff that wouldn't pass muster today. You want to play morality, but you're not cleaner than me." The audience erupted, laughter mixing with thunderous applause. Someone yelled, "She burned you, Jimmy." Kimmel raised an eyebrow, caught off guard, but he regained his composure fast. "Oh, nice one," he said, his voice tinged with grit. "But I'm not the one behind the White House podium. You are. And when Trump's labeled a racist, don't you ever ask yourself what you're doing?" The question hung again, heavier this time. Leavitt took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Kimmel's. "I ask myself every day," she said, her voice suddenly softer, almost earnest. "I ask if I'm doing right, if I'm telling the truth. But what I don't do is let media like you define who I am." She paused, then leaned closer, her voice sharpening again. "You want to label me an enabler? Fine. But I won't sit here letting you twist the truth just because it fits your script." The applause exploded, louder than ever, mixed with boos from dissenters. A TikToker in the crowd raised their phone, yelling, "She just won." The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio now felt like an arena, crackling with the tension between Jimmy Kimmel and Karoline Leavitt. Kimmel tapped the desk, his smirk no longer hiding his intent to corner her. "All right, Karoline, let me ask you something I know you don't want to hear." He paused, staring straight at her, his eyes sharp as a blade. "You're a young woman, 27, part of Gen Z, a group that talks about fairness, diversity, progress. So what do you say to the young people who feel you've betrayed them by standing behind Trump and his policies?" The question dropped like a bomb, heavy and unrelenting. The audience held its breath, a few murmurs rising from the back. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt, her face calm, but her eyes flashed with fierce resolve. Leavitt took a deep breath, sitting straighter, her hands resting lightly on the table, as if ready to land a decisive blow. She looked at Kimmel, then turned to the audience, her gaze sweeping the crowd, like she was pulling them into the fight. "Jimmy," she started, her voice low but powerful. "You think you get Gen Z just because you skim some X-posts?" A few chuckles broke the tense silence. She pressed on, her voice firming. "I'm not here to please everyone, and I'm damn sure not here to live by a script you or anyone else wrote for me. Gen Z isn't a monolith. We have opinions, we argue, and we're not afraid to stand up for what we believe." The audience stirred, scattered claps, rising. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, about to interrupt, but Leavitt signaled with her hand, refusing to let him cut in. "You ask what I'd say to young people who feel betrayed?" she said, her voice rising with confidence. "I'd tell them, find out for yourselves. Don't let media, like you, Jimmy, or hashtags online, decide for you. I do this because I believe in a strong, safe America, not because I want to be a mascot for any movement." The applause grew louder, a shout of "Hell yeah!" ringing from the back. The camera panned fast across the audience. A young girl held up her phone, filming, grinning wide. Kimmel tilted his head, his smile now tinged with strain. "Find out for yourselves," he echoed, his voice laced with doubt. "Sounds nice. But when you stand behind Trump, who's said stuff even I wouldn't joke about on air, don't you think you're sending a different message?" He tapped the desk, his eyes glinting like he'd found a crack. But Leavitt didn't flinch. She leaned closer, locking eyes with Kimmel, her smile now sharp, almost dangerous. "My message is clear, Jimmy," she said, her voice steady but forceful. "I'm not Trump. I'm Karoline Leavitt. I'm not here to parrot his every word, but to make sure the truth gets heard. Not your warped version or anyone else's. You want to talk messages? Look at you. A guy sitting here, making a living mocking people, then pretending you're the voice of justice. The audience roared, applause erupting louder than ever. A TikToker shouted, "She just torched you, Jimmy!" The camera caught Kimmel, eyebrow raised, clearly rattled, but holding steady. "Mocking!" Kimmel shot back, his voice rising, his finger pointing at Leavitt. "I'm asking what millions want to know. You can't just say 'find out' and expect it all to vanish." He laughed, but it didn't catch the crowd this time. Leavitt smiled, the smile of someone who knew she had the upper hand. "I don't expect anything to vanish, Jimmy," she said, her voice dropping but cutting. "I expect people to stop buying the stories you and old media like you peddle. Gen Z doesn't swallow that anymore. We want truth, not Hollywood scripts." The studio shook with applause, strong enough to drown out the background music. A group of young audience members stood, cheering, while others shook their heads, whispering. The camera swept the crowd, capturing the stark divide, some rooting for Leavitt, others unconvinced. Kimmel sat still, his fingers tapping faster, his eyes flickering as if plotting his next move. "Old media," he repeated, his voice edged with grit. "You talk a good game, but you still haven't answered me. How do you feel representing someone millions call a racist?" Leavitt didn't blink. She tilted her head, eyeing Kimmel like he'd just dug his own grave. "How do I feel?" she echoed, her voice low, but brimming with strength. "I feel proud to work for someone who's not afraid to say what needs saying, whatever labels you and others slap on. I'm not here to apologize for Trump. I'm here to do my job. And you, Jimmy? How do you feel sitting here trying to trap me just for a few views?" The audience erupted again, applause thundering, mixed with cheers. A young guy raised his phone yelling, "Post it to X now!" Kimmel leaned back, his smile now a strained curve. He nodded, as if conceding she'd scored, but his eyes stayed on her. "Trap you?" he said, his voice softening. "I just wanted the truth from your mouth." Leavitt smiled, this time a victorious grin. "You just got it," she replied, her voice solid as steel. "And if you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine." The applause continued. The applause in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio still echoed. But Jimmy Kimmel didn't let it linger too long. He leaned back in his chair, that strange smile morphing into a challenging smirk. The camera zoomed in as he tapped the desk, his eyes glinting like a fighter who'd been hit, but wasn't down. "Karoline 1, Jimmy 0, huh?" he said, his voice rising, glancing at an audience member with a small sign. The crowd chuckled, a few cheers mixing with whistles. "You're good, Karoline," he went on, leaning forward. "But don't think you can beat me with just some clever lines and a confident smile." He paused, locking eyes with Leavitt, poised for a fierce counterstrike. Leavitt sat still, her eyes blazing, without a flicker. She smiled faintly, but it was the calm grin of someone still in control. "I don't need to beat you, Jimmy," she replied, her voice even but sharp. "I just need to tell the truth, something you don't seem too used to." The audience roared, applause rising again, mixed with boos from the dissenters. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, visibly stung, but he regained his cool fast. "Truth?" he echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "All right, let's talk truth. You're 27, barely wet behind the ears in politics, and you think you've got it all figured out. Don't you think it's a little naive to stand behind a guy like Trump?" The question landed like a punch, cold, and aimed at Leavitt's potential weakness: youth and inexperience. The audience hushed, a few murmurs rising from the back. The camera panned to Leavitt, her face unchanged, but her fingers tapped the desk, a subtle sign of razor focus. She took a short breath, then leaned toward Kimmel, her eyes never leaving him. "Naive?" she echoed, her voice low, with a Gen Z bite. "Jimmy, I'm not stuck in old thinking like you. Youth isn't a flaw, it's an edge. I see what you don't because I'm not blinded by decades behind that desk mocking people for a paycheck. The audience erupted again, applause thundering, cheers ringing from the young crowd. A girl raised her phone yelling, "She's right!" Kimmel laughed, the laugh of someone stabbed but still upright. "Mocking for a paycheck," he shot back, his voice rising. "I do this to ask what you dodge." You say youth's an edge, but when you defend Trump, who's called rivals lowlifes, horsefaces, don't you think you're selling out your own generation? He tapped the desk, his eyes gleaming like he'd found a gap. Leavitt didn't blink. She sat taller, her fingers still, her eyes locked on Kimmel. "Selling out?" she repeated, her voice deep with power. "I'm not selling anything, Jimmy. I do this 'cause I believe it, not 'cause I need your approval or anyone's. Gen Z doesn't need me as a textbook hero. They need someone straight, even if it bugs you." She paused, then smiled faintly, a razor-sharp grin. "And you think name-calling is the biggest sin? Check your old man show bits. I bet they're not exactly high class either." The studio shook with laughter and applause, loud enough to drown out the music. A young guy held up a sign scrawled with, "Karoline 2, Jimmy 0. Kimmel shrugged, trying to play it cool, but his eyes flashed irritation. "I'm not saying I'm perfect," he replied, his voice edged with grit. "But at least I'm not behind the White House podium, justifying stuff millions see as wrong." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Don't you ever wonder if you're on the wrong path, Karoline? I mean, you're young. You've got time to switch." The question hung, heavy and personal, as ever. The audience hushed, a few gasps escaping the crowd. Leavitt looked at Kimmel, her eyes unflinching. She took a deep breath, then leaned toward him, her voice low but firm. "I wonder every day, Jimmy," she said, showing a rare hint of honesty. "I wonder if I'm doing right, serving this country best. But what I don't do is let you or anyone pick my path. I don't need you as my dad, and I sure don't need you as my conscience." And she paused, then sharpened again. "And you? Ever wonder what you're doing, besides sitting here trying to make me look bad for a few views?" The audience roared, applause thundering again, cheers bursting. A TikToker yelled, "She just ended you, Jimmy." The camera panned to Kimmel. He leaned back, his fingers tapping fast, his smile a strained curve. "Ended me?" he echoed, his voice edged with grit. "I just wanted you straight, Karoline. Maybe you're better at dodging than I thought." He laughed, but it didn't catch the crowd like before. Leavitt smiled, a calm, controlled grin. "I'm not dodging," she said, her voice solid. "I'm just not playing your rules. You want answers? You got them. But you don't like them." Applause rose again, quieter but longer, a silent nod to her grit. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, his hands off the desk, his strained smile hinting at a quiet surrender. "You're tougher than I thought, Karoline," he said, again, his voice low, but still barbed. He tilted his head, his eyes flickering, like he'd try one last jab to save face. "But before we wrap, one more question, just so the folks at home get a little more truth from you." The crowd chuckled, a few whistles sounding from the back. Leavitt sat still, her eyes blazing without a waver. She smiled faintly, the calm grin of someone who'd weathered the storm. "Go ahead, Jimmy," she replied, her voice even but brimming with confidence. "But don't expect me to give you the ending you want." The audience roared, scattered applause rising, mixed with a shout of "She's fire!" from the young crowd. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, stung, but keeping his cool. "All right," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping like he was setting a trap. "You say you don't need my approval, or anyone's. But when Trump's done, 4 years from now, or sooner, what legacy do you think you'll leave? A loyal mouthpiece, or just a young girl caught in his machine?" The question landed, sharp and more personal than ever. The audience hushed, a few murmurs rising from the back. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt, her face steady, but her eyes flashed with fierce resolve. She took a short breath, then leaned toward Kimmel, her hands resting lightly on the table, like she was ready to end this fight. "My legacy," she echoed, her voice low but packed with power. "I'm not here to build statues of myself, Jimmy. I'm here to work, to tell the truth, to serve this country. Call me a loyal mouthpiece if you want, but I'm no one's puppet. I'm Karoline Leavitt, and I stand here on my own 2 feet." The audience exploded, applause thundering, cheers bursting from the young crowd. A girl raised her phone yelling, "Post it to X now!" Kimmel leaned back, tapping the desk lightly, his smile a strained curve. "On your own 2 feet," he repeated, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "Sounds good. But I bet Trump's clapping somewhere backstage." He laughed, trying to reel the crowd in. But the laughter was sparse, drowned out by support for Leavitt. Leavitt tilted her head, eyeing Kimmel like he'd just dug his own hole. "Maybe he's watching," she said, her voice sharp but calm. "But I don't need anyone's applause, not even yours. You want a funny rap for your show? Fine. But here's your last truth. You hold the mic, but I hold my ground. That's what Gen Z respects." She paused, smiling faintly, a victorious but humble grin. The audience clapped again, longer and stronger, a final nod to her spiritual win. Kimmel nodded, his eyes flickering with reluctant respect. "You're a tough one," he said, his voice dropping, his hands up like he was conceding. "Thanks for coming, Karoline Leavitt." He turned to the audience, his smile back to normal. "We'll be right back after the break." The music kicked in, but Leavitt didn't rush to stand. She shook Kimmel's hand, a brief, challenging grip, her eyes locked on his for one last moment. The commercial break music kicked in. The Jimmy Kimmel live studio screen went dark, but the atmosphere in the room still buzzed, like it had just witnessed a boxing match. The audience stood up, applause fading into lively whispers, mixed with laughter and cheers. The camera panned quickly across the crowd, capturing faces of excitement, shock, and a few skeptical headshakes. Karoline Leavitt had just left the stage, her small but powerful figure disappearing behind the wings, leaving a studio trembling with the aftershocks of the showdown. Jimmy Kimmel sat back at his desk, his fingers tapping lightly on the wood, his smirk now carrying a hint of something like resignation. In the front row, a young guy, about 20, raised his phone, his fingers swiping fast across the screen. "She just crushed Jimmy," he shouted, turning to his friend beside him, who was laughing hard and nodding furiously. The camera zoomed in, catching his words. "Posting to X right now. #Leavitt vs. Kimmel. People need to see this." His friend held up a hastily scribbled sign, Karoline 2, Jimmy 0, and they both burst out laughing, clearly swept up in the moment. Applause flared again from a nearby group of young audience members, one yelling loud, "She spoke for us." The vibe felt more like a concert than a late-night talk show. But not everyone was sold. In the middle rows, an older woman, around 50, whispered to the person next to her, her voice full of doubt. "She's just a mouthpiece for Trump. Too arrogant." The man beside her nodded, muttering, "Kimmel should have pushed harder. She dodged everything." The camera panned over them, capturing the stark divide in the crowd. Another group near the exit stood clapping slowly, as if weighing whether Leavitt had won or merely survived. Murmurs spread, turning the studio into a chaotic mix of emotions, excitement, skepticism, and debate. Backstage wasn't quiet either. The secondary camera panned to the wings, where a producer whispered through a headset, "Jimmy, she heated up the whole studio. We need to keep this energy after the break." Kimmel, still at his desk, shrugged, his eyes flickering like he was rethinking his moves. He nodded to the staffer, but his fingers kept tapping on the desk, a small sign of restlessness. Then the camera shifted, catching Leavitt just as she stepped off stage. She paused for a second, took a deep breath, her high heels stopping their rhythm. An assistant rushed over, handed her a water bottle, whispering, "You did great. They're going nuts out there." Leavitt smiled, a triumphant yet calm grin, then nodded slightly. "I know," she said curtly, her eyes blazing, like she'd just walked out of a victory. Back in the audience, people still wouldn't sit. A TikToker, about 18, stood amid the crowd filming a selfie, with the empty stage in the background. "Guys, I just saw Karoline Leavitt burn Jimmy Kimmel down," she shouted into her phone, her voice thrilled. "She's real Gen Z. No fear at all. Follow me for the full clip." She flashed a peace sign, and a few around her clapped in support. The camera panned to another group, where a middle-aged man shook his head, telling his friend, "She's good at talking, but didn't answer anything solid." His friend shrugged. "Well, still, she won on vibe." The instant reactions didn't stop at the studio. The camera cut quickly to a phone screen. X popped up, and the first tweet was already live. "Karoline Leavitt just schooled Jimmy Kimmel on Gen Z. #Leavitt vs. Kimmel." Fires back. It had 200 likes in seconds with a comment, "She didn't back down. Epic." Another tweet from a different angle. "Kimmel let her off too easy. Just all talk." Hashtags started spreading fast like fire on dry grass, and the studio audience seemed to sense it. They pulled out phones, fingers swiping nonstop. In another corner of the room, a trio of young people huddled, filming a quick interview. "What did Karoline just do out there?" one asked, holding a makeshift phone mic. The girl beside him jumped in. "She stood up for herself, didn't let Kimmel lead her. I love how she's not afraid." The third nodded. "She's the kind of person Gen Z needs. Real, no fake." The video ended with laughter, and they shouted, "Post it now!" The camera panned over, catching their raw excitement as if Leavitt had just become their icon. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out, the clash between Karoline Leavitt and Jimmy Kimmel didn't end. It just shifted to a new battlefield: social media and the press. The lively whispers in the room quickly turned into keystrokes, and fingers swiping across phone screens. Mere minutes after Leavitt stepped off stage, the first clip from the interview hit X, captioned, "Karoline Leavitt just torched Jimmy Kimmel live. Leavitt vs. Kimmel fires back." The 30-second video, capturing Leavitt's response to Kimmel's legacy question, racked up over 500 likes and 200 retweets in 10 minutes. Comments exploded below. "She's fearless, true Gen Z." Another wrote, "Kimmel met his match." The #Leavitt vs. Kimmel shot up X's trending list with a flood of posts from live audience members and online viewers. A TikToker, the girl who filmed a selfie in the studio, dropped a longer clip, adding subtitles. "Karoline schools Jimmy on truth." It went viral at breakneck speed, hitting 100,000 views in under an hour. A famous Gen Z influencer with over 2 million followers jumped in, tweeting, "Karoline Leavitt just proved Gen Z isn't just TikTok dances. She's the voice we need. #Gens fights back." The post nabbed 10,000 likes with hundreds of supportive comments. "She spoke for me." "Jimmy's done." But not everyone agreed. Another user fired back, "She's just Trump's megaphone. Don't idolize her." While social media erupted, major news outlets didn't sit idle. CNN dropped an article just 20 minutes post-interview, headlined, "Karoline Leavitt stands firm against Jimmy Kimmel in fiery showdown." It painted her as a young politician unafraid to challenge traditional media, quoting her viral line, "You hold the mic, but I hold my ground." A CNN commentator noted, Leavitt turned an interview into a stage to define herself. A smart move in the social media age, but it didn't shy from critique. Still, she dodged tough Trump questions, leaving doubts about her independence. Fox News, in contrast, hailed Leavitt as a rising star. Their headline, "Karoline Leavitt, Gen Z powerhouse, crushes Jimmy Kimmel in media battle." They praised her as the future face of the GOP, highlighting her Trump loyalty and sharp Gen Z style. A Fox pundit wrote, "She didn't just survive Kimmel. She made him look outdated. This is the leadership we need." The piece cited the live audience's cheers, especially from the young crowd, as proof of her draw. Even Fox admitted, "She's young and the road ahead won't be easy." On YouTube, news and reaction channels started uploading full interview clips with detailed breakdowns. A popular channel with 1 million subs posted, "Karoline Leavitt destroys Jimmy Kimmel. Second-by-second breakdown." The host dissected Leavitt's every word, pointing out how she flipped the script. When Kimmel asked about legacy, she didn't just answer. She made it a manifesto. That's top-tier media skill. It hit 50,000 views in the first hour, with comments split. "She's a legend!" and "She's just good at dodging." Another channel, more critical, posted, "Karoline Leavitt ducks Kimmel's questions. What's the truth?" They argued she didn't face Trump accusations head-on, but conceded she knows how to play the game. Back on X, the opinion war raged on. One user posted Leavitt's "I don't need you as my conscience" clip, commenting, "This is when she won. Kimmel had nothing left." It scored 15,000 likes, with hundreds of retweets, but the opposition didn't back down. An account wrote, "Leavitt's just a younger Trump, arrogant and empty. Kimmel should have dug deeper." That, too, drew thousands of interactions, showing the deep divide Leavitt sparked. A new hashtag emerged, @Gen Z Fights Back, spreading from young supporters, with posts like, "Karoline is US, no fear of old media." Meanwhile, forums like Reddit buzzed hard. On r/Front Politics, a thread titled "Karoline Leavitt versus Jimmy Kimmel, Who Won?" pulled over 2,000 comments. One user wrote, "She's sharp, but dodged every Trump question. Classic spokesperson." Another countered, "She didn't dodge. She beat Kimmel at his own game. Gen Z doesn't owe anyone apologies." On R Conservative, Leavitt was hailed as the new hero, with a comment, "She made Kimmel look like a fool. Trump picked a winner." This split mirrored the studio vibe. One side saw Leavitt as an icon, the other as cocky. Meme pages jumped in fast too. An Instagram meme went viral. Kimmel, with a blank stare, beside Leavitt, captioned, "When Gen Z schools an old man." It hit 30,000 likes, with comments, "She just dropped the quote of the year." Another critical meme showed Leavitt dodging a Kimmel question ball, captioned, "High-level evasion skills." These spread quick, turning the interview into a pop culture moment in hours. International media took notice too. The BBC posted, "America's youngest press secretary faces off with talk show star," calling Leavitt a Gen Z phenomenon shaping U.S. politics. They cited audience reactions and the social media storm, but asked, "Can she sustain this appeal?" A German paper wrote, "Leavitt is a young Trump, smart but divisive." This global attention showed the moment's impact stretched beyond the studio. Leavitt didn't speak right away. An hour post-interview, she tweeted, "Thanks to everyone who watched tonight. Truth is always worth fighting for. America first." It grabbed 50,000 likes in 30 minutes, with fans commenting, "You're a star," and critics, "Nice words, no substance." Kimmel stayed silent online, but a backstage source leaked to TMZ. Jimmy knew she'd be tough, but he didn't expect her to hit that hard. As the night wore on, the ripples kept spreading. YouTube clips crossed 1 million views. #Leavitt vs. Kimmel hit global trend #1 on X. Some young folks dubbed Leavitt Gen Z warrior, while detractors labeled her Trump 2.0. Media kept dissecting. CNN interviewed a media expert who said Leavitt used Kimmel as a springboard. An image win. Fox added, "She's our future." The final question lingered across social media and headlines. Will this moment define Karoline Leavitt's career? Some saw it as a new political star's launch, others a fleeting win. But one thing was undeniable. Leavitt left a mark, not just in the studio, but in the digital world where Gen Z and old media are clashing harder than ever. The story. Karoline Leavitt fires back on Jimmy Kimmel's show after shocking accusation, reflects a very real slice of life in the U.S. today. The deep divide in politics and media, alongside Gen Z's growing role in shaping public opinion. In the tale, Leavitt, a young White House press secretary, faces off with Jimmy Kimmel, a traditional media icon, and turns the interview into a stage to assert herself. She doesn't just counter accusations of enabling Trump with sharp lines like, "I'm not here to please everyone," but taps her Gen Z style to connect with young viewers, urging to find out for yourselves instead of swallowing one-sided media. The X explosion with hashtag Leavitt vs. Kimmel and the split reactions mirror America now. Social media amplifies every take, from praise, "she's true Gen Z," to slams, "just Trump's mouthpiece." The lesson here is that in a polarized U.S., standing firm under pressure and turning adversity into opportunity is key to thriving. Leavitt didn't buckle when Kimmel hit her youth, instead claiming it as an edge. Youth isn't a flaw, it's strength. This tells us, in work, debates, or online, don't let others define your worth. Seize your strengths, like Leavitt did, making the legacy question a personal manifesto. Learn to listen, argue smart, and speak your truth. Because in America today, grit and real connection, like Leavitt's with the young crowd, will make you stand out in the opinion storm. In the wake of the Karoline Leavitt and Jimmy Kimmel showdown, one thing is crystal clear. We're living in a fragmented media landscape, where truth often feels like a battlefield. Everyone has an angle, a narrative, a script they want you to follow. So how do you navigate this minefield and form your own informed opinions? Here's a practical guide.